So this week we're going to be talking about staff training and qualifications. This is one of the key things that you're going to check as a CRA when you go out on site. My name is Steve Pope. So let's talk about the purpose of what we're doing. So the investigator should be qualified by education, training, and experience to assume responsibility for the proper conduct of the trial, should meet all the qualifications specified by the applicable regulatory requirements, and should provide evidence of such qualifications through an up-to-date curriculum CV or curriculum vitae or CV, or relevant documentation requested by the sponsor, the IRB, or the regulatory authority. This comes from ICH E6 Section 4.1, Investigators Qualifications and Agreements. Now, furthermore, the investigator should ensure that all persons assisting with the trial are adequately trained about the protocol, the investigational product, and their related or trial-related duties and functions. And this comes in from ICH E6 Section 4.2, Adequate Resources. So we're going to go over what the investigator's responsibilities are for training staff and how we determine whether or not staff are qualified to do the work that they've been assigned to do. Our learning objectives include discuss investigator qualifications, cite staff training requirements, discuss what being qualified means, and finally compare training documentation with the site signature and duty delegation log. I'll go through that and explain to you how you would evaluate that when you're on site conducting a monitoring visit. So let's talk about investigator qualifications and agreements. This comes from ICH E6 Section 4.1. We've talked about this earlier. But investigators must be qualified by education, training, and experience. And they need to provide evidence of qualifications, which are going to be an up-to-date CV and a current medical license. So the CV is going to be signed and dated within the past 2 years. And of course, the medical license needs to be current and not expired. They're also going to comply with good clinical practice requirements. So we want to see evidence that they've had GCP training recently. So we want to see some type of GCP certificate that has not expired, from a reputable organization, and that can be a number of different areas, a number of different organizations where they can receive that training. Many of them receive the training from their member institutions. So you'll see those certificates and that documentation when you're out on site monitoring. We also need for them to be familiar with the protocol and the investigator's brochure. So once again, as we learned earlier, the investigator, the PI, is going to sign a protocol signature page, which indicates that they have read and understood the protocol and what the requirements for the protocol are. They're also going to sign an acknowledgement of receipt for the investigator's brochure, which means they have read and understood the investigator's brochure. So the protocol, as we know, is going to be specific to the trial itself and detail all of the requirements, all of the various procedures that we're going to do on our study. The investigator's brochure is going to be information regarding the investigational product, some of the past studies that have been done, adverse event history, serious adverse event history, a lot of the science related to the product itself, its mechanism of action, things like that. So we're going to contain all that in our investigator's brochure. They also, talking about investigators, have to permit monitoring and auditing by the sponsor. And they also have to permit inspection by regulatory authorities. That's one of the things that they agree to do when they sign that 1572 that we've talked about earlier in the course. And one of the other requirements that they have is to maintain a list of qualified staff that are delegated certain study duties. We'll go over that in just a moment. So principal investigators should have qualified staff and facilities to conduct the trial. They should ensure that all staff are trained on the protocol, the investigational product, and the trial-related duties and functions related to the study. And they're going to be responsible for supervising any person to whom the PI delegates a task. So we're going to go over that in a little bit more detail. We're going to talk about what it means to be qualified and what the responsibilities are from the PI for delegating certain tasks to members of their staff. So let's talk about what it means to be qualified. So first of all, does the staff member have the required education and training? This is going to be detailed in their CV, and they should provide one for you. So that indicates what their level of education and what training they've had. Do they have the necessary medical training? And staff members can differ greatly on some of these requirements. For example, you're going to have sub-investigators who might be an MD or a DO, or they might be a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant. They might be an RN. And so those people have a certain level of medical training, and they're able, by their training and education, to perform certain tasks. For example, someone who is trained as a medical doctor can perform physical exams. In many cases, in many states, nurse practitioners and physician's assistants can also perform physical exams. They can also assess adverse events and serious adverse events. Normally, in most states, registered nurses, RNs, are not allowed to perform those tasks because they don't have the sufficient training to do that. So these are things that you'll have to pay attention to as you're assessing the qualifications of your staff. And then finally, they should be able to perform medical procedures and tasks. These may be things like doing blood draws, or taking vital signs, or performing ECGs, or performing spirometry. These are tasks that a person can be trained to do that is over and above their baseline medical training. And you may see people that do not hold a medical license performing some of these types of tasks when you go out to your sites. So the primary way that we record what has been delegated to a staff member is using the site signature and duty delegation log, sometimes referred to as the signature log, sometimes referred to as the delegation log. But all of those terms mean essentially the same thing. So each site is going to have one of these logs that lists all the site staff members and then lists the duties or the roles that they've been delegated. So let's take a look at this in a little bit more detail, and so that you can see what the different components of the delegation log mean. So this delegation log is going to be supplied by the sponsor, and they do differ a little bit from sponsor to sponsor or from study to study, but they're essentially the same. So let's talk about each component here and what it represents. So the first thing we notice is the header information, and we see it listed there, duty or delegation of authority and staff signature log. So the header information should contain the name of the principal investigator, and it should also contain the name of the protocol that for our study. You should also have a listing for the page. Now that may appear in the footer of this document, but at the very least, we should have the principal investigator and the protocol title in our header information, and we'll probably have information about the site itself, maybe the site number or the site address. So you may see that information in the header as well. In the first two columns, we're going to see a column for the printed name of the staff member. We're also, in the second column, we're going to see their study role. So as you can see, our first name on the list is our principal investigator, Dr. John Doe. You may or may not see medical titles on here. Many of the sites don't include those, but nevertheless, their study role is going to be indicated in the second column. So let's take a look at the guidelines for filling these out. So the first guideline I want to mention is the Transcelerate guideline that you'll find on Moodle, and it's a very good document for helping you understand what this delegation log represents. So the printed name, in most cases, you will see that individual write their name in there, print their name in there, and their study role. Now, do they have to print their name in there? No, they do not. Someone else can print it in there in the interest of being neat and tidy. You may also see these names typed in there, and that's perfectly acceptable. So you may see it either way, but we're going to see the name of each staff member that's been delegated a responsibility on our trial on this log and what their study role is. In the third column, we're going to see study-specific tasks that have been delegated to the individual staff member. So these numbers that you see in there are going to correspond with the small legend down at the bottom of the form, and it's going to indicate which tasks that individual has been delegated. Any task that has not been delegated by the principal investigator can only be done by the principal investigator. So as you see, we'll go over these in a little more detail once we get into our practical exercise for the week. But you'll see these numbers identified on your delegation log. So a couple of these that I'll point out that have certain requirements. For example, you see physical exams on there. Those can only be done by a medically trained individual. Also assessment for adverse events and serious adverse events can only be done by a medically trained individual. That is going to mean either a medical doctor or an advanced practice person, either a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant. A couple of the others that you want to see on there, any shipment of lab samples requires IATA training, which refers to how to pack and ship these samples using dry ice and things like that. And so people who do that at the site are going to have a certificate of where they've gone through training. It may be just online training that they've done, but we need to see that so that they're where they are trained to actually perform that task. So these numbers are going to be indicated in there. You may see them entered in by, in one person's handwriting, which is certainly fine. You may see them typed in there on some forms. You may see that. Either way, perfectly acceptable. So in the fourth and fifth columns, you see signature, and then next to it you see initials. These have to be signed by the individual whose name is on that row, and their initials have to be included in there as well. So this is going to be a handwritten signature, handwritten initials. The reason we do that is because when you're out there reviewing some of these source documents, those are going to need to be signed by a staff member. For example, if you've got a coordinator, in the example we have here, Marge Bostic, Marge may be out there performing certain tasks, say taking vital signs or drawing lab draws, things like that. And so Marge is going to indicate that she did those things, and we need to be able to verify that her signature and initials matches what's on the delegation log, so that we are confident that she's the one who did that. You may have a physical exam that's performed by John Doe in this study, and we want to compare the signature on that physical exam that John Doe performed with John Doe's signature on the delegation log to make sure they match. Make sure someone else isn't doing that procedure on behalf of John Doe. So these are the reasons that we want to have this signature log, is because we want to know what's delegated, and we also want to have a reference, have a verification of the individual signature and their initials. So the next two columns that we see on our log are going to be the dates of responsibilities. So we see a column for start date and we see a column for end date. So the start date is going to be the date in which the investigator delegated that task to the staff member. It's important to understand that the investigator cannot delegate a task until that staff member has been properly trained on how to perform that task. So we need to make sure that we're watching these dates very carefully so that we don't see a staff member performing certain functions that they have not been trained to do yet. We also want to see in the final column there, the principal investigator is going to sign that column along with the date, verifying that their start date, the date that they have delegated that task. We want these dates to be hopefully the same day. In some cases, they may or may not be the same day. They might be a little bit different, but it's important that the PI sign off on each of these delegated tasks so that we're confident that they've reviewed that and they have delegated a task to someone who is qualified to perform that task. The next document that we're going to go over is not a regulatory document. It's just a simple tool that you can use when you're assessing staff training and qualifications. So what this is a training and delegation log, and you can create something just like this in Microsoft Word, and you can change it based on what the needs of your study are. This is one that I've used in the past that I think works pretty well. So I'm going to explain how to use this, but I wanted to just kind of get you oriented to it so that you'll have an idea of how this is supposed to work. So the way our training and delegation log works is you just have a paper copy of this, or if you wanted to keep it online, you could always do that. And so what you do is you just take your delegation log and write down the names of each staff member that's on the delegation log. And if they are an MD or an RN or a DO, then I usually put that next to their name because that helps me determine if indeed they need to have a medical license that's verified. So as we go across this document, you'll see where in each column we have, the first column we have medical license, we have CV, we have GCP, we have FDF for financial disclosure form, we have protocol training, IATA training, IWRS training, EDC training, and then something in that last column called Intralinks, which is a system that sends out IND safety letters. So what we do, the way this operates, is you just write down the names of everyone on the delegation log, and then as you're reviewing the investigator site file, you verify that they have a medical license, a current medical license. You verify that they've got a current CV, that they have a current GCP certificate, and that if they're listed on the 1572, they have a current financial disclosure form. Then those are the primary essential documents that you're going to collect for each person. And then as you move over, you can use this to assess their training. So you can verify that they've been trained on the protocol. There should be documentation in the investigator site file to indicate that each staff member has been trained on the protocol. Who trained them, the date of the training, how they were trained. And then if they have an IATA certificate, once again, anyone shipping lab samples needs to have this certificate, and we can indicate by a quick check mark in that box if they have it. Do they have training on the IWRS system? That's going to be the system where they register all the subjects and they get their treatment assignment. They usually populate all of the visits as the subjects come in, and then that information is in turn going to populate our electronic data capture system. So the vendors that you use should probably have a certificate that they get once they go through the training. So it'll have their name on it and what company, what vendor was used for the training. And then the same thing for the EDC system. They'll have their name on it. It'll have, Rave or Data Labs or Oracle, whatever EDC system you're using. Each member will have a certificate indicating that they've been trained on that. And then the same is true for the Intralinks. So you can just simply go down, once you populate the first column with everyone's name, go down there and kind of make a quick check mark that you've verified that that document is in their investigator site file. You also see on that top row something called eTMF. So that's a quick way to verify that you have collected that document and it is in your electronic trial master file. So you can put kind of one check mark in the upper left corner and a check mark in the lower right corner, and then you can very quickly look at that matrix and see what you're missing. So fill this out when you first go to the site, take it with you on subsequent visits because it's going to change. You're going to add people, people are going to leave. You're going to want to make sure that you verify that you've got each of those documents for everybody that's at the site. So your readings for this week are going to be from the CRA's Guide to Monitoring Clinical Research. You're going to read Chapter 12, Clinical Investigators. You're also going to read the Transcelerate document that I referred to earlier, which is going to discuss the site signature and delegation of responsibilities log. It's going to go into a little more detail on each of those items that I just went over with the delegation log and explain to you what the proper guidelines are for each of those elements. So read through that document. I think you'll learn a lot from it, and I think you'll get a lot out of this week's reading. And then finally, for your online assignment for this week, I want you to use the training and delegation log matrix that I went over just a couple slides ago. And you're going to use this to compare the site training documents that you reviewed in last week's assignment with the site signature and delegation log that's posted in this week's Moodle topic page. And I want you to determine if there are documents that are missing or if any are not compliant with GCP requirements. So use the site training documents that you reviewed in week 4, and then use this training and delegation log matrix to document, what's in there, and then compare that to the site signature and duty delegation log and determine if there are any discrepancies. So you may find a few of them there, but I want you to spend some time on that, and then I'd like for you to go ahead and post your assessment in this week's discussion forum. So if you have any questions about the assignment, enter a question in the questions to the instructor section on Moodle, and I'll be able to see that and respond to it, and then I'll be able to see what you've posted in the discussion forum this week. So this will give you a good hands-on, real-world practical exercise of one of the functions that you're going to do out on your site when you're assessing staff training and qualifications.